Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight in today to actually reverse engineer the human mind. By analyzing the core systems of dark psychology laid out in our source material, we are going to see that human behavior isn't some spontaneous magic. Instead, it's a highly predictable machine. Let's get started. Think about your day so far. Do you really make your own decisions? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? But as we look closely at this source material, the answer challenges absolutely everything we think we know about our own free will. We all kind of love to believe that our behavior is this beautiful, spontaneous expression of who we uniquely are. But contrast that illusion with the cold reality. We like to think we make spontaneous, independent decisions in isolation, but what actually happens is that we just execute pre-built behavioral scripts, reacting within very structured psychological constraints. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the illusion of choice, the incentive structure, the psychological underlayer, the behavioral loop, some real-world applications, and finally, the human exception. Let's dive right in. Section 1, the illusion of choice. Uncovering the core mechanism. We're starting our system breakdown with the most fundamental misconception about human behavior out there. So the core mechanism here is that people just don't decide freely in a vacuum. Behavior isn't random, it's actually a highly predictable output. Think of it like a funnel. It's driven by our cognition, meaning our thoughts, our emotion, which is our current state, and our incentives. All of this is then filtered straight through our perception and our habits. The biggest takeaway from the source? Your behavior is not just your personality expressing itself. It's a patterned response to environmental pressure. Section 2, the incentive structure, the power of rewards and threats. Let's see how this builds into the invisible forces that actually dictate those predictable outputs. Our source material points out that humans continuously optimize for three main things. First up is reward gain, meaning we're always seeking pleasure, status, or safety. Second is pain avoidance, which means desperately trying to avoid loss or something as simple as the social embarrassment of wearing the wrong outfit to a party. And third, social acceptance, ensuring we belong and that our identity is secure. Whoever understands whether a person is optimizing for pleasure, trying to avoid embarrassment, or seeking social identity security can predict their behavior far better than any personality test ever could. And when you weigh these forces against each other, the fear of loss is fundamentally heavier and so much stronger than the desire for gain when it comes to predicting human actions. We are literally wired to protect what we have much more fiercely than to acquire something new. It's a massive cheat code for predicting behavior. To process all of these powerful incentives without our brains just totally overheating, we rely on heavily automated shortcuts. That brings us to Section 3. The psychological underlayer, shortcuts of the mind. Our source highlights a really fascinating psychological truth. We genuinely believe we are actively thinking, but thanks to the cognitive economy principle, we're usually just taking the path of least mental effort. The brain strongly prefers familiar responses and pre-learned scripts over active, exhausting decision-making. These mental shortcuts basically show up in four major ways. First is habit automation. Most behavior isn't active decision-making at all. It's just a repeated pattern. Second is emotional primacy. Emotion acts as the first filter before logic ever even engages, determining exactly what we notice and heavily weighting our interpretations. Then there's uncertainty dependence, meaning when we are confused, we actually increase our reliance on these mental shortcuts. And finally, social approval, which often drives conformity, completely overriding logic. Section 4, the behavioral loop, mapping the system. Now we get to the actual machinery of the mind, viewing human behavior as a closed-loop adaptive system. This brilliantly illustrates the exact chronological timeline of a human reaction. It goes rapidly from the initial stimulus to perception, which immediately triggers an emotional response, then an interpretation, the action itself, and finally reinforcement. The source proves that behavior becomes permanently stable when this specific feedback loop consistently reinforces the exact same action over and over again. If you think about humans like software, you can clearly see the system components at play here. The input layer takes in environmental signals and internal thoughts. Then, the processing layer applies heavy bias filtering and emotional weighting. The output layer is the observable behavior itself, and the feedback layer delivers the consequences that reinforce the loop for the future. The big takeaway? Environmental inputs are heavily filtered by your own biases before they ever become your observable actions. Section 5, Real-World Applications, how this plays out. So how do we take this highly structured psychological model and actually use it in the real world? Let's look at how this transfers across different domains. Whether it's a trader watching price action driven by profit and loss incentives, or a chess player relying on opening habits, or maybe it's a hacker in cybersecurity using phishing to exploit your predictable panic response, military compliance driven by reward and punishment, or a digital feed shaping your doom scrolling via attention rewards. You see, the underlying behavioral mechanics are identical everywhere. Because of this, mastery and analysis requires a specific game plan. Rule 1, identify the incentive structure first, not the personality. Rule 2, map habits before interpreting intentions. Rule 3, observe behavior under stress. A sudden shift in a person's environment or emotional state will absolutely shatter their habits and reveal their true incentive structure. And finally, track their reward and punishment history to reveal their conditioning. But to keep our analysis intellectually rigorous, we've got to acknowledge the blind spots. Section 6, the human exception, the ruthless critique. Look, if we only use the dark psychology model, we fall into a trap. It heavily underestimates human spontaneity and creativity. It reduces behavior way too heavily to just incentives only, completely ignoring cultural, moral, and identity-driven actions that routinely override reward logic. It risks highly deterministic thinking where we just assume people are purely predictable machines. But we aren't purely programmable robots. Our deep-seated identity and moral values can absolutely override basic reward logic. Modern behavioral psychology corrects that strict dark psychology view by proving we operate with what's called bounded rationality. This means we are probabilistic, not fixed. Context and identity matter immensely. Context shifts can radically change our behavioral patterns, and our identity can completely override our standard incentives. There's a single quote that perfectly compresses all the source material into the ultimate behavioral formula you should take away from this explainer today. The strongest predictor of behavior is not personality. It is incentive plus context plus habit strength. That is the true engine behind what we do. So, now that you know you are off and running on pre-built scripts, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. Who or what built the loops you are executing right now? What hidden incentives are driving your habits today? It's something to deeply consider the next time you think you're making a completely free choice. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep observing the loops.